In my 20 plus hours with horror western FPS Blood West, I endured what can only be described as a bell curve of fun. My first hour as the game's nameless undead gunslinger of a protagonist was about as much fun as being born. I had zero context, zero skill, and was perpetually screaming. At the game's spooky pixel monstrosities, sure, but also at its clunky, cumbersome UI and frustrating mechanics. At least I thought they were frustrating, and justifiably so, because on death the game would slap me with a random debuff, like reduced max health or stamina, that would inevitably lead to another death and another debuff. After a couple hours of experimenting and a dozen or so deaths, my now super nerfed stats made it impossible to kill anything, meaning I couldn't gather the requisite materials needed to pay this here totem to remove my now mile-long list of debuffs, meaning I had to just restart the game entirely. Now in hindsight, this self-propelled death spiral was mostly my fault, because when I first booted up Blood West, I saw pixels, demons, guns, and figured it was just like every other fast-paced retro boomer shooter to come out in the last 5 years. So I did what I did in those games, and Leroy Jenkins face first into every enemy I saw. Only problem with that plan is the fact that non-headshots do next to nothing in Blood West, and having to reload mid-fight is a guaranteed death sentence, due to the glacial reload speed. Like I said, I started this game like I started life, zero skill and zero context. Turns out, Blood West is decidedly not a new school fast-paced pixel art boomer shooter, but rather an old school immersive sim, a genre term I had little appreciation for before Blood West, despite having played and enjoyed games like Deus Ex and Dishonored. For the uninitiated, the term immersive sim broadly refers to games that prioritize immersion and player choice via environmental interactivity and realistic simulated systems, which is all nerd speak for, say, having an easier time sneaking past a guard after you extinguish a lantern or blow out a streetlight. Now, unlike those games, Blood West doesn't have a high level of environmental interactivity. Wooden fences and lanterns aren't destructible, for example, and its simulated systems like basic AI behavior and stealth aren't all that immersive. In part because the AI in Blood West is as figuratively brain-dead as it is literally, and stealth in this game is visualized with a boring proximity-based UI meter that spoils scares before they happen. Thus, from a mechanical standpoint, Blood West isn't particularly good as immersive sims go. In fact, it's pretty bad. But where Blood West fails to create immersion through its mechanics, it succeeds with a dark atmospheric soundtrack, intricate level design, and above-average voice acting.
I will be our connection, the link, ever so bloody and messy.
Welcome to our strong climb toward the zenith of Blood West's bell curve of fun, which happened for me around mid-game, particularly around the end of the game's first chapter, of which there are 3. By this point, I had more or less figured out how the game wanted to be played: stealth and headshots, headshots and stealth. And if I was feeling desperate, I'd even kite big groups, run far enough to reset their aggro, and then pick them off one by one with their backs turned. Gradually, I started leveling up, unlocking helpful traits, buying buff-bestowing artifacts, and upgrading my personal arsenal. I was starting to feel pretty unstoppable just in time to get punched in the gallbladder by Blood West's first boss, an evil tree that will pull down its pants to receive punishment if you pop these little plant pimples. That is, assuming you can dodge its wave of wooden spikes and cull off the incessant ads. While I wasn't exactly impressed by Blood West's boss fights, the review copy I received did cut off right before the game's final boss, hence the 99% in this video's title. But what I did face thus far was very challenging with interesting narrative relevance. Speaking of narrative, let's talk story. Upon resurrection, a talking totem directs you to every corner of all 3 maps to gather cursed artifacts for the totem to neutralize in the hopes of restoring the land from its cursed state. There's a nice twist to this dynamic at the end of Chapter 2 that I won't spoil, but then the plot pretty much goes right back to making you go there to get that thing. And it's right about now you're probably realizing that we're on the Blood West bell curve's downward slope. After realizing that there was little more to this game than repetitive fetch quests, through interesting biomes and well-constructed levels admittedly, I nonetheless started to have progressively less and less fun with Blood West as the game went on. The handful of characters you'll meet along the way aren't particularly engaging, and while a variety of new and interesting enemies like the Predator-esque Super Wendigo and Two-Headed Nightbear helped inject some dangerous novelty into Chapter 3, they ultimately didn't change the fact that I felt like I was doing exactly what I did in Chapters 1 and 2. Still, for $25 and about 20 hours of content, I do think that Blood West presents above average value, but don't go in expecting a deeply rewarding or highly polished experience. So in the end, and after averaging up our micrometrics, Blood West earns an okay aggregate megascore of 3.14 out of 5, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the game or my review. Until next time, this is Scope, and thanks for watching.